Welcome to the Empowered Warrior Podcast. My name is Angela Noel, and I am an intuitive coach, acupuncturist, and Chinese herbalist. This podcast is all about empowerment, meaning how you can maintain your personal power in order to have the best life beyond your imagination. An empowered warrior is someone who has the identity of a person who is healthy, radiant, and free from all suffering, and has the tools ready and available to move through life's obstacles with confidence, ease, and a sense of freedom. In this podcast, I bring over 16 years experience in Chinese medicine, countless years of self-development, and a passion for helping others find their personal power. I will be discussing just a few of my favorite topics regarding health from a Chinese medicine perspective, brain habits, and spirituality, so that you can quickly pave your pathway to freedom and be free from the chains that have kept you stuck. My intention with this podcast is to serve as a guide for warriors who want to form a healthy foundation of body, mind, and spirit, and sustain it by changing who they are being from the inside and having a stronger connection to their higher selves. My goal is to help students end the unnecessary suffering that they place on themselves by having poor health habits, negative thought loops, and a lack of self-worth. I am so happy that you're here. Welcome to the Empowered Warrior Podcast, Episode 2. If you are someone who is easily offended, or you know somebody who is easily offended, this is the episode for you. Stay tuned. You may remember from episode 1 that I mentioned I was kind of a rebel. I have always done my own thing and wasn't interested in following the crowd. Well, another thing I am is a disruptor. I actually enjoy stirring the pot and getting people to think differently. Of course, I also mentioned that I've been a bit of a people pleaser for most of my life. So while this disruptor aspect of me was not always seen by everyone, it was always playing in the background. I mentioned the disruptor thing because being a disruptor often leads to people getting offended because many people still live from their emotions. What does that mean exactly? Well, say someone said something that you don't agree with or isn't in alignment with your values, and this is a big one. It implied something about you that could be interpreted as negative. If you live from your emotions, you would allow yourself to get offended, angry, hurt, or sad, etc., etc. And you would be in a low vibrational state for hours, days, weeks, and for some people, years, because you got offended. Have you ever heard of families who have members who just stop talking to one another because someone offended someone else? And if you look on social media, it doesn't take long to notice that people are getting offended all over the place. The internet is an amazing tool, but when misused, it can also be a huge sparring ground for people disagreeing with each other. Now, I want to be perfectly clear here. We are human beings. We are meant to have emotions. It's part of the experience. I mean, come on, is there anything better than joy or happiness? And negative emotions, they have their place too. Anger can be used as a tool for helping you realize that you need to set strong boundaries or learn more about yourself. As someone who is a recovering emotional junkie, I just laughed at that, but it's true. I am a recovering emotional junkie. I used to identify as being a hot mess or a nervous Nelly. I know exactly how it feels to get caught up in emotions, to allow emotions to rule your state of being, to say something out of anger and then regret it. Oh boy. And spend way too much time in my life in worry, sadness, and anger. I totally get it. I get you. And living in a society like we do doesn't help. We live in a victim society, meaning it is actually acceptable to play the victim and be rewarded for it. But more on that later. So being in anger, blame, and shame works for many of us because we get attention for it. But in the end, using emotions this way just means we are giving our power away to emotions that result in bigger, more difficult, and unnecessary emotions. Because what we focus on expands. And this could feasibly go on and on for months or years, wiping out our energy, our happiness, and any opportunity to have the life that we want. Assuming that most of us want peace, joy, and abundance. It's easy to see how destructive our emotions can be if we allow them to be, is it not? I actually like having emotions, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I like to describe emotions as my growth barometer, one of my biggest teachers. Emotions not only let me know how I'm doing, but they show me what lessons I need to learn in order to grow. So if I'm angry or triggered, for example, I can look within myself and ask my higher self what I need to learn from this. I'll give you an example from my life. Recently, I was noticing that I had some feelings come up about a dear, dear friend of mine. I mean, she is like a sister to me. She is my confidant and she knows everything about me, all of my deep, dark secrets. And about 2 months or so ago, I started to notice that I was becoming jealous of her. We both have businesses that are still growing. We run in similar circles. So I started to notice things. And without going into a ton of detail, because the details really don't matter, I was noticing that in my interpretation, she was doing better in business than I was. And I started forming all these made-up stories in my head about it. People like her better. She's better than me, more successful than me. You know, compare-itis. And let me tell you, I would never tell this story publicly a year ago out of shame and embarrassment of my feelings. But I feel it's really important for me to share this with you. And I definitely wouldn't have done what I'm about to tell you next. So it was becoming a real problem. I became so envious that it was getting in the way of my peace, and it was definitely not helping me in business. Okay, let me reword this. I was choosing to allow this issue to get in the way of my peace. My friend was simply going about her business, and I was allowing these feelings to take the driver's seat in my life. It was not a great feeling at all. I was starting to feel very painful. It was starting to feel very painful to be in this place. And I felt inauthentic when I spoke to my friend and told her everything was fine when it wasn't. And then one morning it hit me. I woke up really early and found myself thinking about the jealousy and the envy. And I remembered something I learned in my self-development journey. I looked to my higher self for the answer. I journaled and I meditated and I asked my higher self, what is the lesson here? Why am I having such strong feelings about this friend and my jealousy? This is not me. What am I to learn? And then I surrendered all the noise and chatter in my head, and I allowed the answer to come through. And just like that, as smooth as butter, the answer came. And very quickly, the answer was this. There was still part of me who felt I couldn't succeed in business, that I wasn't cut out for entrepreneurship, and then I will never get ahead. And I wondered, why am I doing all of this if I'm not going to succeed anyway? Then the tears came, and they came, and they came hard. And when the tears fall, there's always truth being revealed. I placed my hand on my heart and I said, it's okay. Let it go. Let it go. It's time for it to go. And when I say it, I mean this tired old story that's been playing in my head way too long in the background, that I am not good enough, that I will never attract my own money in abundance, that I am incapable of running a successful company. And then I journaled and I journaled and I journaled, and it all came out. That story ended that morning. And the most amazing thing, once I allowed all of this to go, there was no more resentment, no more jealousy, no more compare-itis. My heart was open and clear and loving. My love for my friend returned. Not that it ever went away, but the envy really shrouded any loving feeling I had. Jealousy is really a dangerous emotion, you guys. So are you in suspense yet? Because I never did tell you what I did next. So yes, I looked within, I journaled, and I released all of that. But what I did after is something I would have never done in a million years, even 3 to 6 months ago. I told my friend about what I was going through. Yes, that friend. I told her how I felt jealous of her, how I worried I wouldn't succeed in business, and everything this experience taught me. And you know what she did? She received my story with love, and she offered only love. She thanked me for telling her, and couldn't have been more supportive. Man, I have to tell you, this evolution thing isn't for everyone. But it sure does make life so much easier. For the first time in my life, I am able to speak truthfully without fear of judgment. And I've attracted friends like this into my life who can accept a story like that and not make it a big emotional soap opera. How cool is that? And you can have that too. That juicy, freeing life of physical, mental, and spiritual health that comes as the result of being an empowered warrior. I could tell you that doing this work is so valuable and life-changing, but I won't. I'll let you discover that for yourself. But keep listening. The fact that you're still listening to this episode must mean that you really want to learn more about being offended. So yeah, let's talk about that. I actually came up with this podcast topic while in the shower one morning recently. Do you ever get waves of inspiration while in the shower? I swear I should invest in a waterproof notebook and just keep it hanging in the shower, because much of my best work comes while I'm washing my hair. So today I'd like to explore the topic that many of you might relate to, or perhaps you know someone in your life who is this way, and that is someone who is easily offended. You know who I'm talking about. People you have to walk on eggshells around because they are so sensitive. Don't talk about that around so-and-so because that is a touchy subject. The person who is always right and doesn't like to be challenged, or they get offended. Or the person who doesn't like when other people speak up for themselves, or they get offended. And the people who only want to hear what they want to hear and be agreed with. Or else, you know it, they get offended. My goodness, I legit just got tired by talking about these types of people. I know that these people are completely exhausting. Many times we call them energy vampires. Do you know that person? Perhaps you can identify with some of these traits. And if you're one of these people, then if you get really honest with yourself, let me ask you, what are the benefits to always be in a state of reaction and getting easily offended? You may say that there's no benefit, but trust me, there is always a secondary gain to a habit. And yes, getting offended is a brain habit that is not serving you. Oftentimes, the secondary gain or benefit to having a negative habit is comfort. Because let's face it, it's comfortable to not have to look at yourself and face your fears. It's comfortable to sit back and not ask yourself the tough questions. But I promise you, getting started with this type of self-reflection is so much easier than repeating old stories and reliving your pain. And let me be honest with you, I used to be that person. OMG, I was that person. I was so easily offended. I identified with being a sensitive person, and I used to take everything personally. For the longest time, I thought, this is just who I am. I am a sensitive person, and this is how I was born. I am just emotional. I laugh because the joke was on me, really. In looking back, I realized that everything I did was rooted in fear. And I was that person that people had to tiptoe around in order to not upset me. It does not feel good. And I wore that fact that I could read people's emotions like a badge of honor. In other words, I would entangle myself in other people's emotions and take them on myself. And then I would gossip about it with others. I identified as an empath, but I had zero boundaries. And boundaries are really important, especially if you're an empath. In addition to all that, I took on so much BS from others. Stuff that wasn't my own. If my husband was in a bad mood, or if we got into an argument and he became quiet, I literally took that on. I made his emotions my emotions, and as a result, I ignored what was coming up for me emotionally. Such a dangerous place. And the worst part is that I was easily offended and I didn't speak my truth. I held everything in because I was fearful of being vulnerable, judged, and shamed. And oh, the way things came out was not pretty. I would hold it in for so long that I would explode at the slightest comment. Now, of course, our shadows, or our dark moments, tend to come out with the people who are closest to us. So in my case, it was my husband. We've been together for almost 15 years, and I used to identify as someone who was in a rocky relationship. We would fight like cats and dogs, and I would always blame him for not being supportive. I never saw that 80 to 90% of the problems we had was the result of me, the interpretations that I made, which became habitual in my brain. And yes, the way we think is a habit. Habits form pathways in our brain for the purpose of ease. For example, when you're driving home from work or the grocery store, chances are you can drive that route easily without thinking about it or turning on the GPS. That is because it's a habit in your brain. Habits are designed to make our lives easier. You wouldn't want to have to relearn how to get home every time you need to drive home, do you not? And the same goes for triggers, such as being easily offended. If you are someone who gets easily offended, chances are there was a time in your life when something happened to you and you felt unsafe or unloved. When being offended, usually it comes down to not being loved. You got left out at the playground, not invited to a birthday party, and so on. Every time that happens, over time, your reaction to feeling unloved, which is the real cause, becomes habitual. So you react, get offended, start going into negative thought loops, and boom, you are now in a downward spiral of emotions. It's understandable how this can all happen. Back during the time of our ancestors, the hunter-gatherers, being part of a tribe was very important. If we disagreed with our tribe and got kicked out, chances are we would probably die. So this need to belong and feel loved is a very primal feeling that comes from the oldest part of our brain, the reptilian part of the brain. From there, we get all of our survival instincts. It is where fear comes from. And at the time of this recording, May 2020, we are in the crisis of COVID-19. And if you remember when this all started in March 2020, it was a crazy time. People were flooding the grocery stores, hoarding food, toilet paper, and fighting with other people over supplies, and basically acting irrationally. I say irrationally because they were acting out of fear of the unknown. You probably already know now that there was absolutely nothing to fear. We may have been a little short on toilet paper, but thanks to all the people who work so hard delivering food and stocking the shelves, we did not run out of food. So getting back to being offended, as I mentioned earlier, getting offended is the result of a habit in our brain that formed from a story we told ourselves long ago about lack of love, and that went on repeat every time it happened. But the beautiful thing is this. While it's understandable that we were born with these primal fears of being ousted by the tribe, we have the ability to change our stories at any time. Just because something happened when you were 7 doesn't mean that you need to continue having the same reaction at 22 or 34 or 45. Just as those habits had the ability to form, we have the ability to replace those old habits, in this case getting offended, with new habits. And if you're struggling with some of these concepts that I'm talking about today, let me ask you this. Where will you be in 6 months, a year, 5 years, or a decade from now if you are not willing to let go of the beliefs that are creating stories in your head that are causing you to get offended? And to that point, I'd love for you to think about someone who has qualities you really admire. It could be a celebrity or not, but someone who has the qualities of a person you would like to be. For me, it's Gisele Bündchen. In my interpretation, Gisele is smart, has a smart business sense, and is a steward for planet Earth. She also espouses health and wellness, not only from the physical body, but she also talks about being healthy spiritually. And if any of my listeners know Gisele, I would love to interview her for my podcast. So anyway, if you find yourself getting caught up in your own BS, ask yourself this. Do you think so-and-so would get caught up in this challenge? So-and-so meaning that person that you admire. So for me, I would ask, does Gisele spend much time worrying about what other people think of her? Most likely not. Recently, I received an email from one of my followers. She wrote that one of my newsletters really offended her, and she told me why. To give some context, the newsletter was strongly written with some tough love. Again, the disruptor thing. And I even said in the first line in the newsletter that if you are a sensitive person and cannot look at tough love for what it is, then you should probably stop reading. The letter was basically a plea, an invitation to get out of your head and into your heart. And because it is my goal in life to move people instead of keeping them swimming in a sea of inspiration, the tone could be interpreted as, well, a bit harsh. Because honestly, if I had used a more loving tone, I may have gotten a few atta-girl responses of approval, but chances are readers would probably have passively deleted or moved on to their next thing. So apparently she read the content and she got quite triggered enough to tell me about it. In reading the email, the big picture I got out of it was that she was making my words mean something negative about her. You see, when you get offended or triggered, that is often what is happening, is it not? I wrote back and I thanked her for the feedback. I explained to her that if she was offended, then that is exactly what the letter was intended to do. It got her thinking. It got her stirred up. And when I work with people, there is one thing that I teach. When we have strong feelings, this is the perfect opportunity to learn more about ourselves. Like I mentioned in my story earlier about my friend, it is the perfect opportunity to heal. In our society, I believe most of us never learned how to properly process our feelings. We learn that if somebody offends us, then it is the doing of the other person and not us. It's quite easy to blame the other person and point the finger and project our feelings onto somebody else. But like I said, we are in victim culture. And the thing is, when we do this continuously, a few things happen. 1, we are giving our power away to another person or a situation. meaning we are now powerless and feel like our destiny is out of control instead of in our control. Because after all, we are the one who chose to react, not the other person. 2, we miss out on an opportunity to heal whatever it was that caused being offended in the first place. And 3, we will continue to be given a lesson, meaning these triggers will keep happening over and over and over again until the cycle is healed by ending it. You know those people who always seem to have bad luck? Like the same thing keeps happening to them in jobs, relationships, and friendships, and maybe even car accidents? They are the ones who will often say, "Why does this keep happening to me?" That is because these people tend to not see their part in the given situation. They often blame other people or situations for what's wrong in their life instead of owning up to the problem, healing whatever is causing the problem, and moving on. So the next time you are offended by something and you are feeling resistant to healing yourself, here is another question to ask yourself. What do you prefer? A life of empowerment, freedom, and joy because you chose to make the changes? Or a life of continuing suffering, pain, as a result of being imprisoned by your thoughts and reactions? Before I sign off, I'd like to share with you a quick exercise that you can do the next time you are offended. Please do this exercise while in a quiet space and not while operating machinery or driving. Number 1, the trigger happens. Somebody said something, you weren't invited to something, etc. 2, you react. Instead of running away with your emotions, stop. Name the emotion you're feeling, such as anger, jealousy, sadness, etc. 3, take a few minutes to close your eyes and take some deep breaths, and think of a time when this feeling felt very alive in you. Where were you? How old were you? What do you look like, and are there any sounds you can hear? Really take this time to see this and allow yourself to truly feel that emotion. 4, while still breathing, allow that version of yourself to tell all. What feelings are coming up? What stories? Have your journal handy and start writing it all out. 5, once you feel complete, like everything is out on paper, close your eyes again and put your hand on your heart, or wherever you're noticing the feelings coming from. For me, it's always my heart. Take this time to tell that part of you that you are safe and it's okay. I've got this. You have no need to worry anymore, and you are loved. Whatever statements ring true to you and make sense. Lastly, with eyes closed and still taking deep breaths, imagine that feeling and energy being released. Sometimes I visualize it being released into the earth. Other times, I just envision it going to where it needs to go. As long as you are intentional about letting it go from your energy, there is no right or wrong way. 7, open your eyes and take some time to notice how you are feeling. This might be a good time to journal some more about your experience and write about anything else that comes to mind that will help you release this out of your system. Lastly, number 8, seal your intention by doing something really fun. This is a very important step and should not be skipped. For me, I turn on one of my favorite songs that help me move out of a bad mood, and I dance my booty off. For some people, it might be a walk or a run. The key is it must be fun. When I dance, I go crazy. I don't hold back. I get really, really dramatic with my movements sometimes. What this does is that it helps form a new pathway in your brain after the healing is done. It is the beginning of a new way of being, and isn't that exciting? It also helps your brain associate this exercise as being fun and enjoyable, so that you look forward to doing it the next time. So I hope you found this episode helpful in understanding the brain science behind why we get offended, and also I hope you found this exercise helpful in transforming yourself from being easily offended to an empowered warrior. Don't forget to dance and have fun. And I look forward to catching up with you in the next episode. Until then, know that you are more powerful than you think and capable of being the empowered warrior you've always dreamed of being. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for listening to the Empowered Warrior podcast. It is an honor and a privilege to have you as a listener. If you've enjoyed listening to this podcast and would like to help others pave their pathway to freedom, end their disempowerment and suffering, and become an empowered warrior, please share this podcast with your friends and family. Also, it is my intention to help humanity grow and evolve to their highest potential. So if you really enjoy what you're hearing, please help me spread the word by leaving a review in iTunes. Thank you again, and I am so grateful to be able to serve you in this very exciting way.